So Emily just gave us a really great overview of things that are happening in the field, but my talk is going to focus on how you prevent those losses from coming off of your field and moving to the edge of field and into sort of our interface with surface water. I did my graduate work at Ohio State University and with Randall Reeder, so I know I would be in trouble if I didn't put my conclusions first. So here's my conclusions, but I'm going to spend the rest of my time trying to convince you of how we came about these conclusions. So drainage water management, I'm really talking about this in a really broad sense of the word. Drainage water management can be just controlled drainage, but also if you're managing your water at all, there's other practices like phosphorus removal structures, and that's our steel slag filters, that you can also use. So controlled drainage, why we really like controlled drainage is because it's a physical discharge reduction practice that reduces the amount of water you're losing from your tile drains. And it also increases your potential to store rainfall in your field. And unfortunately, here's the thing. My yield benefits are not a guarantee, and I'm going to explain to you why that is. And our phosphorus removal structures, we get lower dissolved phosphorus concentrations in your subsurface drainage discharge with these filters. And depending on the design, you may also see a reduction in discharge with these structures. And these two things are really great because they can pair well with one another. They're not mutually exclusive on your field. So I don't need to explain to all of you guys why we need drainage in Northwest Ohio soils. But what I do think a lot of us need to think about is this golden rule of drainage, which says drain all the water you need to, but not a single drop more than you need to. It's your water. You may want it later. So how we do that is with a practice called controlled drainage, also known as drainage water management. This is the same NRCS practice standard 554, if you're taking notes. and we have these structures. They're buried under the ground. I'll go back here. This is what they look like above ground, and they can be anywhere from sort of 4 feet tall to 8 feet tall to reach the depth of your drains, and they usually outlet into a ditch on the side of your property. And the way that these work is on the inside of the structure, you're stacking adjustable boards inside of the control structure. And what this does is it artificially raises the outlet of your tile drainage system, so you don't have the same level of intensity of drainage all throughout the year. Obviously, in that picture that you saw, you need intense drainage when you're about to drive all your heavy machinery in the field for your planting operations or potentially for harvest, but you really don't need that level of intensity of drainage when there's no crop on the field and your growing crop is established. So controlled drainage is a way to make your drainage system customizable throughout the year. This graphic kind of shows, just as a block, your soil broken up into its solid, liquid, and air components. Most of your soil is solid. You're not going to fit any water inside of that solid portion. As you increase your depth going down, your bulk density increases, and so you get less space for air and less space for water. And that air space, that's your drainable porosity of your soil as well. So you're actually only getting about 10 to 5% of your soil profile is drainable porosity and contains air. So when you look at that in relation to drainage water management, that's also the percent of your soil profile that you can control with drainage water management. So only about 5 or 10% of the entire profile. It's really not very much, but it can make a difference. Our basic management strategy that we like to recommend to farmers is to lower the outlet in the spring about 10 days before planting. This is my challenge, that you only need 10 days before planting to get your soils drained enough to plant. It'll take a couple of days, 3 or 4 days, to release the water out of that drainable pore space, and then you need evapotranspiration, another 3 to 4 days without rainfall, for the sun to move the rest of the water out of the profile. So ideally, we'd like you to aim about 10 days before planting. And in the spring, you want to raise that, you can raise that water level back up after your crop roots have established. For corn, this is, really going to be kind of that V6 stage. Your corn's actually going to be pretty resistant to the water once you get to that point, because it's got a root system, like adventitious roots is what they're called, but they're like those finger roots that allow it to take up air even if it's in a little bit of water. And then it also kind of hits around June 15th is kind of the target date to raise your boards back up. And if you get a lot of rainfall, this is where you would want to, if you're installing these systems, maybe go out, check to see you're not, getting your boards full up with water during the growing season. We have some sort of anecdotal evidence of farmers saying their fields get too wet with controlled drainage when their crops are growing. But honestly, in Ohio, with the evapotranspiration and your crops growing, if you wait till June 15th and you don't have a June like maybe June 2015, you should be okay. And then in the fall, after that water table draws down and your crops have grown and you're about to harvest, you may want to check inside that box again and check the water level. And you might not actually have any water table there to release in the fall. So you can obviously release those boards and drain the soil profile fully if you need to before you harvest, and then raise those boards up immediately after harvest and all your fall field work is done, so that here's where you're going to get your big bang for your buck, is in the winter growing season from an environmental standpoint. This is where you're going to reduce those losses and in nitrogen and phosphorus. So we looked, the USDA partnered with the Ohio State University to conduct long-term experiments of controlled drainage all across Northwest Ohio. And these sites were 8 privately managed farms. So that means the farmer just went out and did what the farmer was normally going to do, and we managed the boards, and we were collecting the data and trying to figure out sort of what benefits the farmer got from using controlled drainage systems. And what we found was that when your systems are managed, you got a 50% reduction every day in how much discharge you lose. And overall, across the entire year, if you look at that in bulk, on average, a 40% reduction in your annual discharge. And of course, that did vary by site. We had a wide range of losses. Some sites were lower, a little bit lower, about 20% reduction, and some of them were higher, 73% reduction in your discharge. And as I said before, the controlled drainage is really a physical production practice to reduce discharge. And one of the things you don't see up here is is a reduction or a change in nitrate concentration or in phosphorus concentration. We do not see a significant change in concentrations with changing the water level in your field. So, but the benefit to that is any nutrients that are in that water are not going out through your drains also. So your nutrient reduction is about equivalent to your discharge reduction when you're looking at it, when you're monitoring your discharge reduction. So this graph shows the distribution of rainfall month by month for Northwest Ohio. This is the 30-year average. And as you can see, we actually get a lot of rainfall through the months of May, June, and July during our primary growing season. And drainage discharge generally, I've stacked that in front of the graph, so now you see how much of that rainfall leaves as conventional drainage in each month. So in the winter, so January, February, and March, nearly all of the water that falls as rain is leaving out through your tile drains. That's a huge loss. But then as you get to June, July, and August, you can see that you have a lot of rainfall falling and really not much at all coming out through the drains. So when you start using a system like controlled drainage, now I've stacked in front what your discharge reduction is if you're using controlled drainage systems. And you can see the huge difference that you get from controlled drainage in the winter, December, January, February, March, and then in sort of that April, May when you're not managing as consistently, it's more equivalent. But the other thing I really think is important here is to look at that sort of June, July, and August. There's just not that much drain flow to manage in the first place. And so that's why we don't always see a yield increase, because there's just not a lot of water there. So then that kind of leads into my next slide to talk about yield. Improved yield is not a guarantee. Really, we want people to install these structures, and we want them to install them for environmental benefit. And that's really because we have low drain flow in the growing season. You can increase your chances if you can, control the rainfall, or if you're doing something like sub-irrigation to prepare for it. And we monitored soil moisture in one of our field sites from 2011 to 2014, and we did see in the summer of 2013 an increase in soil moisture during the summer while we were managing the board. So that's a good thing. This shows that it's possible. It's just not going to happen every year. And I really think this is important too. If water is reaching the drains, you want to keep that and you can use it. So why not? I mean, it's controlled drainage. It may kind of be like, well, it's not going to make you a big bang for your buck as far as yield goes, but why not, right? And now that I've given you all these caveats, now I can tell you that we actually did see from 2008 to 2011 a 2 to 3% yield increase in corn and soybeans across these 8 field sites. So now I'm going to transition a little bit to the phosphorus removal structures. And these are our steel slag filters. How these systems work is the gray material you see in the ditch that looks like gravel is not gravel, it's steel slag. And the phosphorus that's in the drainage water, it binds to the calcium present in the slag and just removes it right out of the drainage water. So we have a couple different designs. These are brand new installed. This one got installed last May. And so this system is kind of like a trench system. You can see an inlet in this kind of top, the inlets into the trench from a field site, from a field that's behind the barn that was in the first picture, and outlets into a wetland. And our second filter is a different design. This one is actually buried underground. So this is what it looked like during construction when we were filling the pit. It's totally lined along the outside and on the top and buried. And this is what the system looks like now. So we got 2 very different filter systems. And unfortunately, this one just was installed in September, so we don't have the data back from this filter system yet because, as you know, the water table's low once you get to the fall, and it just kind of started to get flow through it in December. So I don't have the data to share from you from the second one, but I have the data from the first one. And these are dissolved phosphorus concentrations. And I hope it's not too hard for you to see, but the orange line and the dots, that's the concentrations of the drainage water that's coming into this phosphorus filter. And then the blue dots underneath it, that's the phosphorus concentrations coming out. And every point where we had a filter coming out of the outlet, we had just a huge reduction in our phosphorus concentrations. Now, this doesn't take into account the discharge. This is not load. This is just concentrations. But the other thing that you can see is we kind of can draw a really nice line going into our phosphorus filter, and it's just scatter points coming out. Every time there's a point, that's when water was coming out of the filter. So not only do we have phosphorus reduction in concentrations, but we actually had less discharge coming out of the filter because of its design. So we can confidently say that we're also reducing load with this system just by looking at these concentrations. So to sum all of that up, you have your controlled drainage systems, and those work at the edge of the field to reduce your tile drainage discharge and to keep that water in your field so you can potentially use it when you need it. And like I said, the yield benefit is not a guarantee, but it is your water. And so you should be managing those systems, and you should be looking at it for the potential. It's not a guarantee. It's not going to happen every year. And then we use the phosphorus removal structures. Those we have seen so far, over 6 months, a really great reduction in soluble phosphorus concentration just from those filters, and it's been installed for a really short time. And those don't have a set lifespan of a year. The lifespan is based on the load that's going to come through those filters, and then you can replace that material once all the binding sites on the calcium for the steel slag become full, essentially. You can and yeah, in addition to lowering the concentration, you may reduce the tile discharge based on the design.